Hello and welcome to the final part of our top 20 anime of the 2010s. I'm so excited to share my love for these final five shows with you. So we're getting started with Shirobako. This is, of course, the great anime about making anime that I think the medium really deserves. Anime is such a unique industry as a creative industry, as kind of a passion project, as a horrible capitalistic death march. So many different facets of it, I think, stand apart from any other kind of creative venture. And anime has deserved to have a spotlight shone on it from within animation. It's a very deep and technical dive into the logistics and specifics of creating anime. I really appreciate how intricate and thorough they are in showing every step, every person involved, every complication that can arise from even the smallest logistical crises. And this is really becoming confirmed accurate to me. In the years since watching this, I've watched some other like kind of animation documentaries and stuff. And now I actually have a friend working in the industry, a friend who's working as an animator, and a lot of the stuff he shared with me, the seeing the sort of materials he gets and the sort of meetings he has and the general kind of communication between him and the production staff, it's like, damn, it really is just Shirobako. Like, Shirobako was totally right. This, I'd say, contains a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment and just this real overwhelming sense of joy I get when watching a story about following a creative project from inception to completion. Any show, any story that has that kind of theme to it is always going to resonate with me really deeply emotionally. As someone who aspires to make creative works myself, who has these big ambitious creative projects, like this video series that we slowly grind out after many, many months. Seeing these sorts of stories I find deeply inspirational, deeply satisfying, deeply cathartic. But of course, it's not easy. There's roller coasters on roller coasters of complications along the way. This being the real meat of the show. How will they deal with the crisis of the week to keep production moving smoothly along? This instills in you, I think, a real appreciation of anime that you might otherwise kind of gloss over or take for granted. It'll level up your love of the entire medium. It'll make you appreciate all of the work and teamwork and collaboration and all of the complications that undoubtedly emerged with all of your favorite shows, and kind of see them as the little miracles they are that they make it to the screen. The joy of creative collaboration, and yet also the frustration and the sweet success that ultimately results. It's just also inspirational to me. I think this kind of story is among my absolute favorites. Okay, so that's all about the theme of the show. That's all about the dressing of it. But what actually makes it so good? It can't just be because it's about anime. I think one of the strongest things about it is the cast of characters. I would say this is undoubtedly one of the best cast of characters in all of anime. Everyone is so endearing and yet flawed. They're real. They mature as you understand them. You see more dimensions of them. They feel more and more real. And almost everyone has some significant character arc over the course of the series. Some internal revelations or kind of growth through adversity or some major kind of relationship that forms a new way of thinking in their minds. I'm just so overwhelmed at how deep every characterization goes, given the hugely expansive cast. There's all of these intricate hierarchies interwoven, job title, how they are in the office hierarchy, who they report to, who they have under them, the respect that comes with that, but then also comes with things like expertise, their number of roles, years in that role, the number of shows they've worked on, kind of veteran status that's conferred after particularly hellish seasons and stuff. Everybody has this aura of reputation around them. That has one of the things I love most in any sort of medium is kind of an ambiguity of power level, where you're so curious, of these two characters, who will demand the respect, who will dine to the other one. And of course, all of these characters aren't just static in these roles, but have their own ambitions that they want to pursue further in their career or become more expert in what they do. Um, which just even further complicates things, that instead of having this huge multi-dimensional web of all these different pinpoints of characters, it's actually more like vectors, that everyone is going to be shooting for a different spot as well, and seeing how those collide and kind of interfere with each other, I think is one of the most compelling parts of the plot. Every motivation, every interaction, every development is really well established and connected. It's not just random drama. It's not forced drama, to use that very cliched term. But instead, it really all just results from the characters, all from their flaws and their ambitions, um, is what drives every development in the story. All of this, I feel, is very Wire-esque. If you've ever watched the very famous, very critically acclaimed crime drama, The Wire, this is the Wire of anime. I will not back down from this statement. I think that is the truest thing said in this entire spreadsheet. Shirobako is the Wire of anime. If you like The Wire, watch Shirobako. Done. And all of this accumulates in all of its intricacies and kind of craftsmanship, not just in moments of odd appreciation, where you're going, oh, dang, that was well written. Like, having those characters interact in that way just makes so much sense with what's been established. And it's so fascinating, all of this taking place against the backdrop of an animation studio. You have that appreciation, but the real appeal of this show is that it hits so deep on an emotional level. It's completely overwhelming how attached you get to these characters. And then in these moments of climax and catharsis, it's just overwhelming and so, so, so beautiful. There's some parts, if I think about them too much, it'll make me cry. Just thinking about it, just thinking about the context and what it represents. I've alluded to one of them, of course, in the screenshot that I chose. Real fans will know what's up. Real fans will see that and start to feel like crying right away. It's just a really beautiful, beautiful moment. And the way that just so many plot lines build to it, through so many episodes, through so many trials and tribulations, just to these absolute moments of oh, it's so good. Okay, I don't know what else to say. All right, let's move on to our next show. At number 4, we have Madoka. Mahou Shoujo Madoka Magica. Obviously, everyone has heard of this. What can we even say about Madoka at this point? This is one of the hardest slides for me to start writing, because I feel like every point has been beaten to death before. I've already written extensively about the show before. It's one of the most critically analyzed and discussed shows on this entire list of the entire decade. I don't think there's anything really novel left to be said. This is in itself kind of a cliche, but I think often when shows get this sort of reputation, where they have such an influence, such a legacy, so much almost like academic discussion is happening around its themes, its meanings, its moral messages, it's kind of easy to forget how good it actually is just as a show. Putting aside what it represents, putting aside the legacy it's had, putting aside how it's changed people's lives after watching it, it's just a really good, well-made show. The production is really bold and fresh, and yet because it kind of is this evolution of many things that Shaft does traditionally through a lot of their shows, it feels mastered. It feels like they already saw the final form of this extremely bold new aesthetic direction. They used like every tool in their book to craft something that was so new and yet so solidly built on Shaft fundamentals. The aesthetic really could carry this show along. Just like the opening shots of Madoka running on that checkerboard print marble floor and seeing the mixed media hellscape that is Walpurgis Night, that could have been a whole show. Like they could have just kind of kept hitting that note, kept pushing those images, and you can see in the aftermath of Madoka, a lot of the imitators, a lot of the other edgy magical girl shows kind of do that. They just aim for like one little subset of the Madoka look and stretch that across 12 episodes, but not Shaft. Every time you kind of feel comfortable with the aesthetic language, they push it in an extreme other direction. Again, just like taking full advantage of the mixed media and the really extreme camera positioning and total like blend of emotional and aesthetic depiction that Shaft is already so expert in. They do like a million different aesthetics within this kind of overall Madoka look. And just think about like all of the really kind of mechanical, technical things that are done so well. The choreography of the fight scenes in the series is nuts. It doesn't need to be that good. This series would have been plenty interesting if you just cut out all of the battles. They just happen off screen, like Katana Monogatari, Katana Gatari, or whatever that series is called. The soundtrack too, like, I mean, it's hard to imagine the show without it, but it certainly would still be a masterpiece if it wasn't so friggin' good. And yet, it's one of the best anime soundtracks I've heard in my life. It's like iconic. Just the sheer hype that they're able to create, just that visceral intensity in watching it, is totally tangential to the real like meat of the show, like the moral lessons and the plot considerations and the characterization and stuff like that. And yet they just absolutely nail it. I don't know. I feel like this goes underappreciated. We kind of take it for granted, just how amazing this show is on a production level. The twists of the turns of the plot are really compelling, really tightly written. Urobuchi did not kind of just throw things in for the sake of it. Almost everything has this kind of a deep impact to the plot later, whether that be in terms of developing character motivations or setting up like intricacies of lore. I've been saying the word intricacies a lot in this video. I think you'll find in these videos, because I'm like working with the slideshow and I'm kind of like in conversation with my past self, I end up like fixating on some weird words. I think almost every one of these list videos has some word that I end up saying like a really statistically significant number of times. But anyways, sorry, I just like caught myself saying intricacies. I was like, how many times? Yeah, I really appreciate how this series builds up its world building and lore. That it's not so overdone and explicit that it feels like it wants to be more than it is. Of course, you know, Madoka ended up being this entire universe with spin-offs and Mobage and potential sequel bait and stuff. For better or worse, I would say mostly worse. But the way the show is written doesn't suggest that they were trying to do that. The way the show is written has like a very nice, complete, perfection to it, where everything kind of feeds into itself, and it isn't just kind of, well, we'll make it work like this for the sake of easier writing in future installments or anything like that. I really appreciate that, because so many shows that kind of have this required lore, you can tell that they're obviously reaching. They're reaching for the game adaptation, or they're reaching for the spin-off. But man, I don't know. They knew what they were doing for sure. But of course, as I said, all of this is in service of the real meat of the show, which is how it resonates with you emotionally. The aesthetic, again, in the same way that the aesthetic could just carry the entire show, the very core concept of this, that it's a magical girl show, but kind of like a deconstruction. What would this be like in reality? Wouldn't they just be like suffering horribly all the time to be bound in this magical contract, constantly fighting dangerous monsters? Like, aren't all the Precures going home and crying themselves to sleep? Isn't Sailor Moon going to need extensive therapy as she approaches her 30s? Asking those questions, really delving into the psychology of what that world would be like in reality, could have been enough. That easily could have sufficed for a show. And it is quite thought-provoking, I think, to have that kind of deconstruction. Like, I think it's fun to think about those sorts of things, and it kind of makes an additional dimension of depth in the like non-deconstruction examples of that genre. Like, if you go to Precure with this mentality, it really opens things up. Yeah, you know, y'all watch Precure. You know that the top 3 shows are just Precure Smile, Precure Peace, Precure Hug, whatever. No, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, this really would have sufficed on its own. But the way the show develops moral questions, while abstracting them in this magical setting, while first framing them as like deconstructions of tropes you're familiar with, and then escalating that into okay, but how does this reflect real life? How does this reflect actual humanity? And of course, this is the Evangelion trick. This is Anno's trick to make you think first, like, wow, I had never considered robot show like this, and then go, wow, I had never really considered life like this. And I think this is why. You cannot directly map them onto IRL dilemmas. You can't say, oh, trying to decide whether or not to sign the contract is essentially the same as, I don't know, deciding whether or not to recycle. There's no easy one-to-one mapping onto anything you're actually going to face in life. So what ends up happening is the ways that they feel like resonant and true and familiar to you, like the way they parallel thought processes that you had in some totally different unknown context. It feels very profound. It feels mysterious and ultimately very unforgettable that the show provokes such a response in people. Ultimately, I would say this is a story of having a beautiful life, and this is a term we might return to later in this video. That what I would say ultimately ends up happening in a lot of cases in this show's plot is that the characters kind of grapple with moral issues, moral dilemmas, questions of ethics, questions of reciprocity and social contracts and understanding one another, and all of these very big, heady things. But then ultimately they act in kind of an emotional way that reflects, I think, rather than like a moral certitude, an aesthetic certitude, where instead of being confident that they're doing quote unquote the right thing, they're confident that they're doing a beautiful thing. And this makes me think of a quote by Nietzsche, where he says something along the lines of, like, nature is not good or evil. I believe this is the subject of Beyond Good and Evil, the famous Nietzsche book, that we can't really judge anything as good or evil. That is all just aesthetics. That is all just like a human interpretation, a human coding of the world in these labels of good and evil. And that really the progression of nature, the progression of actual events in the course of history has no concern for these things. And so if you kind of internalize that, if you believe something like that kind of like nihilistic view of morality, then basically you're acknowledging to yourself that it's not that the aesthetics don't exist. There is still something called beauty. It's just that beauty is no more real or no more false, that is, than truth or justice or righteousness or evil or badness or selfishness. That these are all just kind of relative concepts that are defined by the person observing them and judging them. Does any of this make sense? And that Madoka is saying in the end that you choose beauty, that you choose something that has this deep aesthetic resonance in yourself, that you don't have to dress it up as being morally right or true or anything like that. You just acknowledge that what you want most is a beautiful life. And this show, I think, really resonates with me on this kind of deep down desire that what I want most is a beautiful life. And so it's become very, very special to me. So much so that it's quite shocking that it's only at number 4. So you know the next 3 are bangers. And we start off with Nichijou. As I was looking for a good screen cap, I noticed the book Maya's reading is just called Buddha statue. That's what this means. Buddha-zo. Buddha statue. So it's literally just called Buddha statue, and it has a picture of a Buddha statue on it. Anyways, this is Nichijou. I hope y'all already know. I think if I could convince everyone on Earth to watch just one anime, literally everyone on the entire planet will just instantly have, I don't know how long it takes, like 12 hours or whatever, to sit down and watch one anime, it would be Nichijou. Not because I think it's the best representation of the medium, or the best gateway to other shows, or some profoundly life-improving experience, although it is quite fantastic in all of those things. A fantastic representation of the medium, absolutely, for sure. A great gateway to all sorts of different genres, and I think it does have a very profound effect on your life after you watch it. But that's not why. The real reason is because I can think of no better way to just gift pure joy and contentment onto the world. If I just want to make people happy for a little bit in these trying times, it would be with Nichijou. Is it the funniest anime ever made? I don't know. We do have Takyu on this list. I think Takyu might give it a run for its money, but it is pretty friggin' funny. The humor is like so weird, sometimes really niche, involving Japanese folklore and puns and stuff that no Western viewer could ever understand. But even within those extremely weird jokes, and certainly on the level of the myriad examples of physical comedy and stuff, there is some kind of universal. There is something that I think resonates with almost anyone. I haven't seen anyone watch this show and not laugh. I haven't talked to anyone who's watched it that didn't have some bits that stick out in their mind as just moving them to absolute hysterics. And I'd be surprised. I think I could sit down my grandma and show her parts of the show, and she would be cracking up. How could you not? Really, how could you not? The way it works is by escalating along with you. That you kind of see how the joke could build, what more extremes it could go to. It kind of walks along with you like that, cracking wise, making each other laugh. I don't know why I've chosen this image of the show physically walking next to you, but then it goes so far beyond. And there's always a moment in these big comedy sketches where KyoAni just like blasts the gas when it comes to the animation quality. Things just go mega Sakuga, infinity budget mode. And where you thought the joke might hit its limit, where you thought the comedy might end, it instead like doubles the progress thus far in an instant. And you're like, you can't even keep up with how hard you're laughing. Like you can't even comprehend how hard the joke is going right now. And yeah, this is reflected that when the joke blasts off, so does the production quality. I think this is KyoAni's strongest show in so many different metrics. Like you can point to Violet Evergarden, you can point to Hyouka, you can point to Hibike, but I think in some regards, like none of them match Nichijou and just like the variety, just the fluidity of some of the like fight scenes. Mind blowing that the show has fight scenes, but yeah. I think this is a definite contender for KyoAni's best produced show, which of course is saying a lot. I don't think any studio touches them in overall quality. But then, and of course, underneath all of that, as I've said so many times in these slides before, is something very heartwarming, something very everyday. Even with all this wackiness, the moments where things settle down and we're just treated to a scene of a convenience store shelf, a scene of people waiting at a traffic light, a small sketch showing a very common everyday interaction that, when you reflect on it, is a little bit funny. Or something even more sentimental, just really taking in the scenery as friends walk home together. When they show these real low-key, heartwarming, soft moments, it doesn't feel like contrast or juxtaposition with the mania, the over-the-top animation, the absurd physical comedy, but just like another natural facet of the world that we're seeing, that they just peacefully coexist with one another in this kind of Nichijou utopia. And I think what really is beautiful to me is thinking about how this is based on a manga written by just a quirky author, just this individual person who had this very quirky perspective on the world, the sort of things he observed, the sort of situations he came up with, just blooms into something that connects with the quirky love we all have for this quirky world. And you know, just the way that it highlights and accentuates all of the small, weird fantasies we've had, all of the idle daydreams we've had of absurdity suddenly flooding into what we know is familiar. And then our kind of our observations of the weirdness of the everyday, that the things that those fantasies spring forth is just small observational humor of isn't it weird that we do this way? Isn't it funny when this kind of coincidence happens? Isn't it nice to appreciate the small moment of synchronicity or kind of happenstance aesthetic. And it may seem very trite and maybe privileged, bubbled, to say that the world is quirky these days. But you know, in these trying times, oh my god, I hate it so much. But we should remember that, you know, even if everything at the top is fucked, and everything, most of the middle now is quite solidly fucked, and we're quite possibly all just doomed on levels that we can't even comprehend yet. In the smallest places, in the very small places, in the imagination, in just small observation, in coincidence and interpersonal connection, and all these things that don't really matter, that won't save us, that won't impact us, there is still something beautiful. There is still something very charming and wonderful, that will make you feel genuine joy when you notice it in those very small places. And it's about all we have left, so I think it's good to remember that. Okay. Whoa! Moving. Oh my gosh. Move the camera, please. Moving on to our number 2 show. We have Hibike Euphonium. So here now we move into another kind of tier, I think, of anime. We enter what I would call the crying zone, where all of the other qualities become pretty secondary to, you know, like all of the things that I usually appreciate about anime. Now those are all very secondary to this transcendental level of emotional impact, which is that when I watch shows on this tier, when I watch shows in the crying zone, I just feel, I cry a lot. I feel totally overwhelmed. I feel this overwhelming transcendental catharsis where it just feels like my entire, everything I've repressed, everything I block away, everything I try to compartmentalize and segment and break down and understand just floods out all at once. This is the true power of anime. This is when things start getting really unleashed and really overpower me. This is when I start completely losing to anime. And I don't want to imply that just because that stuff is secondary, that it isn't what creates that quality. It's not that just these shows have something kind of like random and that just happens to connect with me on some like small subtle level that just manages to be like the linchpin of my entire emotional framework or anything like that. Although I think there is something like that happening too. But really it's the masterful and sublime qualities of these shows are what enables me to be so invested, to allow myself to just fully kind of lose myself into the show. This is undeniably a masterpiece. As I said before, this is some of KyoAni's finest animation. I think, again, it's in a conversation with like Hyoka and Violet Evergarden, but and they all lose to Nichijou. But I think in terms of what's being depicted, this is one of the most interesting ones, and the mastery that they have in depicting that. Things like the performance scene, things like big emotional interpersonal confrontations, moments of like tenderness, of recollection and sentimentality. These are the things that resonate with me deepest in anime. And so when I see them produced so beautifully, it becomes something really, really special. The sound design, of course, is brilliant and representative of a very wonderful project. This is something that I really try to stop and consider whenever I'm watching this show. They had to. It's a show about an orchestra, right? And then throughout the show, the orchestra is performing all the time, like original pieces. You see like rehearsals, you see mistakes, you see them run sectionals, just a small subsection of the instruments they're playing. So what they had to do, the only way that this was at all feasible to do, was to just make an orchestra themselves. That KyoAni hired an orchestra. That every character on this show has like a real person that they hired to play them, to play their instrument for these scenes. Just imagine being one of those people, knowing that you're kind of in this shadow band, that you're living this like parallel band existence. I don't know. It's just like a really amazing creative project. I wish there was like a documentary about how this all went down. And I think just the fact that they're hiring orchestral musicians, they're writing original orchestral music, they're presenting it with such love on such a massive stage. It's an amazing project. For a music nerd like me, this is a really, really amazing project. Everything just glows in this series with this welcoming warmth that just makes you feel like you've been watching the show all your life or something. That it dwells within you somewhere very deep and very significant, and it's like always been there. And that just comes from the production. Like I honestly think so, that if you just had like a music video with this sort of production and aesthetic and stuff, and these sorts of scenes, without any sort of story or character, it would still feel so special to you. It still feels so warm. But it isn't just happy sunshiny times. There's some drama in this show. There is some deep, deep soul searching. There is some probing of major existential questions, and taking on, I think, quite a profound and interesting kind of philosophical statement that a lot of the characters, when addressing these questions, actually come up with really meaningful, novel answers, that even to a philosophy nerd like me, really hit differently somehow, maybe because it's anime. The plot compellingly weaves these personal conflicts, these soul-searching introspections into a grand archetypal narrative, where you feel like the characters are representing not just themselves, but entire types of people, and how those types of people make it in any type of setting, not just band, but the workplace, other hobbies, relationships, family life. It seems to resonate on all those levels, that you can easily see the lessons like reflected in any imagined scenario. But yet, despite doing this archetypal casting, it still feels like a very intimate plot about very specific people in a very short time in their lives. That we just kind of immerse ourselves in it. The very lives of these people. It's just them living their lives. I don't know. The way that this show connects to my own musical experiences, in high school, I played band and I sang in the choir, and then throughout my undergrad, I sang in another choir. And I took it with varying levels of seriousness. I wish I had taken it more seriously throughout high school. It was only in kind of the last 2 years that I kind of realized like how much more fun it would be and how more meaningful it would be if I like really went at it hard, instead of before where I kind of just like coasted a lot. Um, so I have like a bit of like regret there, and then as I kind of started taking it more seriously, I made some like really powerful memories. A lot of experiences like really stay with me. It's like a very unique part of my life. Unfortunately, all within the past right now. I do want to sing in choir again. I was just talking to a friend about this, how I had planned on trying to find a choir to join, before, of course, COVID. Um, yeah, it's really unbearably emotional to be reminded of all this stuff, and just kind of a flood of snapshots and scenes and memories that match up with the show, but, not entirely. Like, it really accentuates like things I feel I was missing because I didn't push myself hard enough, or I didn't connect with people enough at the time. But that, even more than that, though, the connections I did make, the memories I did make, the imprinting on my mind of practice and rehearsal, and, the final performances, those just resonate so deep when I see these things that suggest them. They feel all the more precious to me. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot. There's a scene during one of the concerts in the second season in episode 5 where they briefly show just a lot of people's scores, where you can see all these notes they've made and pictures they've paper clipped on there of their friends to inspire them. And I remember doing stuff like that. I remember writing myself little messages of encouragement. Of course, you mark the score up to hell and back to give yourself notes and reminders, but then on top of that, just like trying to connect with my future self, and inspire my future self. It's really beautiful. I don't know. It's just so tender and precious, and the fact that I never talked to other people about doing that. I never saw it firsthand when I was doing it, but seeing in the show that everyone does that was like a universal experience, hiding behind my own personal experience. It's just too much. It's really just too much. It's man, I don't know. So I think this show can be summarized as a story of what we can do for one another. That if you take away the band trappings and kind of the more philosophical questions, most of the plot lines revolve around kind of helping each other out, understanding what we can and can't do for one another, understanding how we can put ourselves out there to help each other, which I think is very beautiful. Um, at first, in terms of this interpersonal stuff, I was very hyper focused on the Yuri. And don't get me wrong, this is a masterpiece of Yuri. This is as what's her name, Nakatani Neo Sensei, the author of Bloom Into You. She said in an interview that when she watched Hibike, she was almost sad because it did everything she wanted to do in Yuri. Watching episode 8 of season 1 was just like the masterpiece she had been aiming for this whole time was just like already there, which I imagine is quite an overwhelming experience. And I agree with her. It is a true masterpiece of Yuri. And we could go on for an hour about what that means and what's kind of special about Yuri as a genre and the specific characters of Kumiko and Reina and stuff. But anyways, as time has passed, I've really come to appreciate all of the relationships of the show. They're all very special in their own way, and they all have a lot of the qualities I really like in Yuri, which I guess could be summarized as the I think I already said this, right? In the Bloom Into You slides? I could just go back and check what I said. The outermost reaching of the innermost feelings, the most delicate outward feelers of what dwells deepest within your heart. I think almost every interpersonal relationship in the show captures something about that. I think what we find is that there are empty places inside of us. Hobbies can fill some of it, playing in a band. But when you do so, you realize even then that other people are what's filling most of it. And in a pinch, when you certainly feel the strength of that void, and you really feel like you need to connect with people to fill it up, to find some kind of meaning. And maybe you don't have anyone that can do that for you right now. Sometimes watching anime can do it. I think watching this show can do it. And I think that's what really makes it so powerful for me. Okay, so what could possibly top this? It is, of course, Sangatsu no Lion. This is quite tragically Shaft's final masterpiece. It's overwhelmingly beautiful, overflowing with ideas, and when I think about it, my mind just races with themes I want to talk about and specific memories I have of watching it and what I think different characterizations mean and how I like how different plot points are constructed, but it feels really insufficient to try to talk about it like that. It feels like I can barely begin to scratch the surface of any one of those aspects, let alone trying to paint a portrait of what the overall show is like. We can kind of contextualize it with superlative praise, comparing it to other shows in this list. It's got the Wire-esque cast of Shiro Bako, insofar as all of the characters have their own ambitions and complicated hierarchies and ambiguous power levels. And a lot of how the plot is motivated is just the clashing of those different pieces. It has a lot of competitive insight, just like Ping Pong. I'd say even more than Ping Pong. This one has really resonated with me on questions of what it means to compete, what it means to be good at something, what it means to kind of value yourself based on your skills, the differences between self-esteem and self-compassion. really reaching deep into those topics without flinching, without trying to find an easy answer. Of course, the deep, deep interpersonal connection of Hibike, these stories of what can we do for one another that resonate with me so deeply, and really feel like the show is doing something for me, that via the show, the creators, Umino Sensei and all the people at Shaft are actually reaching out to me and offering some compassion, offering some understanding. The transcendent production of Nichijou, I think, goes just as well here. This is Shaft's production in absolute top form. The comedy scenes have this amazing comedic ecstasy to them, the timing of it, the juxtaposition of shots, the facial expressions, Shaft's signature feeling of emotion spilling into aesthetics. But then, of course, in the dramatic scenes, like a chilling, haunting atmosphere reminiscent of Madoka. In every single depiction, Shaft is not content with just drawing reality, just showing scenes of life like a live action movie or anything like that, but instead finding abstract ways of representation, of iconification, of really immersing yourself in another dimension of the show. The show just constantly is transcending itself in every direction when it does things like that. And then, of course, like Madoka, I feel like I think we'll talk about this more in this slide, but it is a show again about having a beautiful life, about ultimately making your choices on this, of course, not purely aesthetic level, but on a level where what really motivates you is some deep. I don't know. It's really hard to explain. The production is so wonderful. Shaft applies all of their uniquely charming techniques to this deeply personal and realistic feeling. It just depicts, you know, a normal town in Japan. It depicts so many normal aspects of life: convenience stores, shogi parlors, office buildings, the train. All of these extremely normal, everyday things are really enchanted by, as I was talking about, this transcendental production where it's not so simple to just show the train, but you amplify what it feels like to be on the train through all of these abstract production choices. It enchants the world where you start to see everything with this kind of abstraction, where you start to imagine how Shaft would animate your life, and it's very compelling. It's very satisfying, and it makes you appreciate a lot of things that maybe you took for granted or overlooked. Never before. Never. This is saying a lot. I have loved stories and media and movies and books and games and comics since as far back as I can remember, since I was a tiny little child. And I don't think I have ever felt as connected to these characters. I don't think I have ever felt so caught up in their emotional lives that I really feel like I love them, that I feel such an overwhelming outpouring of love for any characters in any series up until now. I can't overstate this. This is the highest praise I can imagine giving a fictional series, at least one that's like based around characters. And it's not just the main cast. It's most of the minor casts too. They inevitably contain multitudes. Even ones that just appear in one episode are so crafted, so lovable in all of their flaws and all of their struggles and ambitions, that you find yourself just wishing there could be a million series that follow all of the different tangential paths from these characters. You know that if you could see them at home, if you could see them among their family, if you could see them in this situation and that situation, you would uncover just more richness, more things to appreciate, and an even deeper and more meaningful sense of love. The buildup of this empathy makes me just weep openly through some episodes. I rewatched it recently, and it was the same story. Even more so, I guess, because I anticipated things, but I don't want to spoil stuff. I don't want to talk about, specific plot points or anything. I'm sure you know what kind of things I'm alluding to. Reading the manga too, I just cry. I just cry and cry and cry. And it's not necessarily a sad cry. It's certainly not always a happy cry, but it's just weeping at the beauty, the beauty of this life and at my own capability of this boundless empathy for fictional characters. It makes me realize that I have that capability to care that much about people, even fictional people, and it really makes me feel good about myself. Like I really appreciate that about myself, that I can care so much. And sometimes it's tough. Like it's really tough sometimes to care and to be so sensitive to the emotional lives of others. It makes it hard to put yourself out there. It makes it hard to kind of open yourself up to people necessarily because you just are too overwhelmed by what is happening with them. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just, and so watching this show and feeling myself care so much, feeling that depth within me, it makes me love myself in a way that not many other things have. It's always been something really hard for me to love myself. So I really appreciate that it shows me just how much I can love. And I don't think this is uncommon that people cry around the show. This is known as a big crier. That just getting within 100 feet of it will make you cry. Uh, so I'm not ashamed of it. I don't think I'm weird. I don't think it's wrong by any stretch. It's the exact opposite. It's something really important is being touched on by this series that I think exists in all of us, that we need to be in communication with. This show makes me feel like I want to be a good person. I want to have a beautiful life. It makes me feel those things so deeply and confidently that all of the other like doubts I have about myself, all of the feelings of self-loathing that I've struggled with through the years, just fall away. It just becomes so simple that I want to be a good person. I want to have a beautiful life. And those things just become so apparent to me in watching this. And then when the media player closes, and I'm just sitting there and I go, well, what am I gonna do though? What does that actually mean? Doesn't matter. I think I am living a beautiful life. My life is pretty weird. By many accounts, it could be called a failure. By many other accounts, it could be called a success. I don't know. It's not really judgeable on those metrics, I guess. Nobody's life is. All I can say is that I try to be a good person, and I think my life is quite beautiful. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. It's tough to talk about. Yeah. It's a really good show. You really should watch it. I've told so many people to watch this show. I really think almost anyone could appreciate it, that it'll be moving for almost anyone. I have had very little success. The first few episodes are kind of slow, kind of confusing, trying to catch up to the in media res sort of aspects of it. Um, and then I would say the really good stuff doesn't even happen until the second season. That's a lot to ask. People watch 24 episodes with the promise that it gets like really good. Even if they're liking it, it's a lot to ask. I don't know. So I've gotten like maybe 3 or 4 people to watch this show. Just that's a good start. That's a good start. I've probably told like 50 people. Oh, watch Sangatsu. It's so good. Oh man. Yeah. Anyways, that's it. Right? We did it. yeah, that's the end of the slideshow. This was tough. It's tough to try to get my feelings down on just one slide, but as I said in the music one, I cut it off there. I knew if I started letting myself spill over, just talk about things until I felt like I talked enough about them, I would just never finish it. It would just be hundreds and hundreds of slides, and it would never get done. So I think this is a good system, but it's tough to feel like I've said enough. It's tough to feel like I've really captured what's so special about these shows. I hope I inspired people to maybe check some of them out. Maybe at least a couple shows on this list sound like your cup of tea. Yeah, I'm really happy that I got this done. It's like friggin' September. my original goal was to get all of these done like before spring started in winter 2020, but of course this year has been absolutely friggin' crazy, and my motivation has been all over the place, and all sorts of other stuff is happening in all aspects of my life. So the fact that I got it done at all before 2021, I guess, is quite satisfying. Next, I think we're gonna do movies. Top 20 movies of the 2010s. See if that goes a little faster. I don't know. This was one of the ones that I wanted to do most, though, so I'm glad it got finished. Who knows if the other ones will? We'll do our best. That's all I can say. This is one of the harder ones to make too, I think, just because you know, anime is such a special medium to me in terms of how it impacts me emotionally. Whereas movies, it's a little more like appreciative. It's more just that I'm like, this one was really good. It's not like it has some super overwhelming sentimental connection for me. Yeah, we did it. Okay. See you later.